the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Welcome, folks, to Through a Scottish Prism. Hope you and yours are well. Very, very, very sad day for us here on Through a Scottish Prism. There's obviously a huge influence on this show and contributor, Ian Lawson, a giant, and that term is not used loosely, a giant of the independence movement, has sadly and rapidly been taken away from us. He was. I did interview Ian a couple of times when we used to do audio, and then we decided, Phil, Ian, myself, Techie, and Jason, who was with us at the time, to do a results show for the 2021 election. That was the first video we did, and Ian was in that and involved with us right through until February 22. And I'll come on to that in a minute. But just to tell you that the influence that Ian had, that can't be stressed enough. But we sometimes allude to it on here, but we love doing this programme for you, and we love interacting with you, and we love your comments, and we love to hear back from you. But we also love the laugh we have as a group before and after. And I've got to tell you, Ian was a guy who, his knowledge of politics was fantastic. He had a great way of articulating it down so that it was made, agreeable to the viewers. He was also a very funny man, although he did tell dad jokes. Some of them were shocking, but they were funny, and we had some extreme laughs on here before and after the show, and sometimes, and we also have comments up the side, so Techie can send us a message saying, switch up your volume, don't, or can you put this picture up? That's why you see me sometimes typing. I'm sending a message to Techie, but we can all interact, and Ian used to send out some messages. It was very hard sometimes keeping a straight face with some of the things that he said. As I alluded to as I said in my article to accompany this, it was my plan. We fell out, Ian and the rest of us, over the Russian incursion into Ukraine. Ian was a very pro-NATO, pro-America, Russophobic person, which goes against, I'm an anti-war. I'm not particularly pro-American, in fact, probably the exact opposite. I'm not Russophobic. And it was a clash, and it was one that Ian couldn't stay. He said just couldn't handle us because we wouldn't back the NATO position, something I couldn't do and will never do. I won't back a war. I'll continue to shout for whether it be in the Ukraine or Palestine or the Congo, ceasefires, stop the killing. But anyway, I'm glad to say we managed to patch up that difference, and he came back recently, as you've probably all seen. He was on the show several times, and it was my intention that when the Ukraine conflict was over to get Ian back. We do have a space here, as you can know, and we had hoped that he would rejoin us once that was over, and we didn't have anything that would conflict with us. But that's all I want to say. This show is dedicated to Ian. It's just a small thing. His contribution to our cause was immense and huge, and you'll hear a couple of stories from my colleagues here, just to tell you some things that you didn't maybe know that Ian got up to and did. Some of them were hysterical, but they were always well thought out, and they were always for our country, for Scotland and for independence. He was a committed independence, and he'll be sadly missed, sadly missed. And as we're of the same people, we're of the same age, etc. So it brings your mortality to face. Lloyd, have you got anything you'd like to say about our friend Ian? Perhaps not. Is Lloyd frozen?
I think his headphones, he's having problems with sound at the minute.
All right. Phil, you wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, great times, Ian. With such a laugh, man. It's like it's a lot of it you can't be repeated. Like the time when he left his headset, when he was so proud he got this new headset and off he went for the toilet. and we get a running commentary of how that went. Great guy, and he just laughed it off, because that's Ian. Um, and like the rest of us, sometimes he wasn't easy. Like the rest of us, I'm a difficult guy to deal with. So are you, Roddy. So are we all. Why? Because we know enough about what we're up against to know that true grit is required here to fight through. So a bit of sand in the Vaseline is required, and that's what we do. We stand up for things we believe in, and I always had an admiration that Ian would always do that, no matter the cost. So respect for that. Great fun, but the laughs we had in the stuff. He also had an ability, somebody touched on earlier, to hold an issue or describe an issue to a group of us or to you as if he was holding it up in 3 dimensions and twisting it around. It had a real ability to explain things really well. And his business experience and his experience in politics, he'd seen enough to know exactly how the game was played, and his contributions are massive over the piece. And what a journey he was on from conservatism in business, because that's, you look after your own, into looking after the people, and he fought hard for what matters and for something that another great person, one of the greats upon whose shoulders we stand, and we continue to reach for that which will free our people and our nation. And obviously thoughts go to Celia and the girls, and wonderful times. Sorely missed, top man.
Yeah. Lloyd, you have something to tell us.
Yeah, Ian was an extraordinary man, but it's, we live in a strange world of coincidences. It was only after I met Ian that I discovered that his wife Celia had been 2 years above me at school, and we had many people in common. And then when I was selected to stand in the Dumbarton constituency in 1999, discovered that one of the most important activists was Ian's sister Muriel, who ran the pipe band in Dumbarton. But I think my favourite story about him is one from the Govan by-election, when Ian, being the campaigner that he was, he had been making a point of going to the bookies in the pub at Govan Cross at lunchtime when the men came out the shipyard, just to get a feeling of what was going on, fully knowing that not all the guys who worked in the yard actually lived within the constituency, but the majority of them did. So he came back one day, and there was a huddle which involved him, I think Alex Salmon, Jim Sillars, the famous Stevie Butler. And from that, Ian went to the bank just before lunchtime at the shipyard, the bank at Govan Cross, and got out £500, and then waited until the bookie was full. And at this time, you've got to remember, Jim was 5 to 1. Jim was at 5 to 1, and the Labour Party were 3 to 1 on. And Ian made a big hoo-ha of going into the bookies and putting £500 on Jim Sillars. And I tell you, from that afternoon onwards, we knew we were going to win, because the word spread like wildfire. That big laddie, the big boy that's with that Jim Sillars, he's just put £500 to get put on him. And that's, I wouldn't say it was what turned it. It was Jim that turned it. But what made a big difference was this show. It was what Ian was doing, was showing confidence in a really public manner, in a manner which you couldn't stand up on a platform and say, I'm going to win. But walking into the bookies and putting £500 on Jim Sillars made sure that he did win.
Yeah, he was a legend in his own life. He was a legend. He will remain a legend. And it's even more so that we need to double our efforts, folks. Double our efforts.
One of the great things about Ian was I fell out with Ian countless times. I mean, you could fall out with him in the morning and be pals with him at lunchtime and fall out with him in the afternoon as well. But the issue, the real issue about Ian was listen to him, hear what he's got to say. If you disagree with him, disagree with him. But he always had a serious contribution to make. And that came from a broad range of experience, but also, I would definitely say he was someone who had the ability to campaign on the streets in a way unlike many others. I mean, I've come across a few over the years, but Ian had that special thing about him. And of course, the growly voice helped.
Oh yeah, the raspberry. It was good on here as well. But as we affectionately knew him, the Paisley Mohawk, I named him, and he will always be known as the Paisley Mohawk. Yeah. The bold Paisley Mohawk. Sadly missed, as Phil said, to Celia and the girls, Laura, Rachel, and his beloved granddaughter, we send our heartfelt condolences. I'm actually feeling a wee bit lump in my throat here at the moment as we speak. But anyway, he would have been here, I'm sure, to join in some of the conversations we have today. And just to start on that, Eva, one of the ones I'd loved him to hear his opinion on was the All Under One banner cancelled their march on the September the 7th to join forces with the Anti-fascist brigade in Glasgow, who are going to stand against the upcoming fascists who are coming up from England, and no doubt their Scots-born knuckle-dragging colleagues will join them in George Square. I wrote a blog about it this week, saying that, don't fight with pigs because you end up both getting dirty and the pigs like it. Mm-hmm. Your opinion, one, do you agree that they should have cancelled All Under One banner in Edinburgh, and do you agree with that they should go you take your grandkids and your indie dugs to indie marches. Would you take them to Glasgow for this?
Well, can I say in the first instance, Roddy, by way of a personal tribute, that Ian Lawson left an indelible mark on the Scottish political landscape, and it's because he was a man of all parts. As Lloyd said, he could campaign on the streets, he could be a street fighter when appropriate, and he could also go into the television studios and behave in an articulate and sensible and knowledgeable and driven and very passionate fashion, because he was a man who knew his stuff. And that came from observing and participating in all aspects of Scottish life, particularly in Scottish political life. And he would have had a lot to say about Scottish politics this very week, when we've seen evidence of people in Scotland who should know better maintaining a position on what is a British bandwagon. The issues surrounding racism and anti-fascism are primarily English or British issues. They are not Scottish issues in the main. And I know some people will be disappointed in me saying that. I am anti-racism, I am anti-fascism, but I am pro-independence. And as soon as you begin to dilute that independence message with other messages, the power and the importance and the significance of the message for independence becomes diluted and it becomes weakened. And that is not a good thing for our cause. I fully support anybody who wants to demonstrate against any form of hatred within our society. It has no place. But Scotland's politicians, Scotland's civic leaders need to develop, particularly if they're independence-minded, need to develop strategies that promote a Scottish approach. And a Scottish approach is to promote all that's good in Scotland and not to, you said, get involved in struggles with pigs and you come out covered in muck. I would say you don't lie down with them because you come out jumping with fleas. What will happen when there are opposing events of this nature is either those fascists will disappear without trace, as I think happened in some places yesterday, or there will be problems where both sides will be blamed. And instead of being able to say the independence movement took the high ground and promoted all that is good and positive about Scotland, there will be screeds and screeds written about how Scotland is no different from the rest of the UK in the context of its issues with racism and fascism. And that's signally untrue. All you have to do to confirm that position is to look at statistics in respect of hate crime, which over the course of the past few years, particularly since the passing of the hate crime legislation, have shown that hate crime in Scotland, in fact, is mainly not on the rise. In some aspects, the figures are lower now than they were a few years ago. So we need to contextualise this, not avoid the issue, not dodge it, but put it in its correct and accurate context, which is that Scotland as a whole is anti-racism, anti-fascism, and we don't need demonstrations to confirm what we already know to be the case.
Absolutely. Phil, do you agree with All Under One banner's position that they should have cancelled Edinburgh and go and help the anti-fascists?
Well, the answer to that is no. I completely disagree, and for the same reasons that has just been cited by Eva. Antifa have issues, okay? But it's any sensible person is anti-poverty, anti-fascism, anti-hate, anti-racism. Yes, we agree, and we should stand up against this type of thing. But you do not achieve that by holding a placard up at a march. You achieve it by gaining independence. And enough of this has been sidelined by the betrayal of the SNP that we need to get this movement back on track. And that's boots on the ground, people talking about it, fighting for it, because the end of this imposition of racism, because that's what it is, and fascism and hate and sectarianism. We've got enough of that our own, but we need to get rid of that too, or reduce it and fight it. But this is coming into our society. The way we get rid of this stuff and stand up and get the country and the society we want is by looking after our own, by taking control of our own destiny. And that is not by walking in marches with placards saying down with hate. We're all against racism. We're all against, well, you'd like to think so, but the only way we deliver this is by taking control of our own country. I think so. It is a big mistake, and the one other thing, it actually leads on from what we talked about in the last show, which was, the law. Do we uphold the law? Because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's happening here that questions not just the application, not just the law itself, but the application of it, and who heeds the law and who's abusing the law, and the abuses of the law by the establishment, and whether the law being proven to be wrong, why should we follow the law? And there's something that jumped into my head at the time when we discussed it last week, and it's even more prevalent now. One of my favourite films, A Man for All Seasons, or plays, turned into the Devil's Speech. The Devil's Speech in A Man for All Seasons. This is Sir Thomas More. For me, was the greatest achievement in 1966 when it was released. Boo-hoo, England. But Paul Schofield was brilliant in it. I mean, and listening to this on YouTube, A Man for All Seasons, The Devil's Speech, that's what you should look in. Short, it was Richie Rich came in and he was going to betray him, and the whole family knew it, and he played brilliantly by a young John Hurt, and Paul Schofield is playing Sir Thomas More, let him walk, as if he were the devil himself, I would have let him walk. And so he's going, well, so you give the benefit the devil, the benefit of the law, and he says, yes, what would you do, cut a large swathe through the laws of this country to capture the devil? Yes, I'd cut down all the laws in this land to capture the devil. And Paul Schofield turned around and says, oh, so and what then? What then? This land is planted deep with the laws, and it stands high. You would cut them all down to capture the devil. And what then when you capture him, when you corner him, he turns round on you? How do you protect yourself? What do you face him with? Because what you're facing then, you're allowing the strongest to win. The laws are there for your own protection, and we need to make sure that these laws are not abused. First, by those institutions that are supposed to uphold it and implement it, and secondly, those that would enforce it, and thirdly, we who need to obey the law. And we can strike down laws, but we do it through due process. So no, this is a very pernicious thing. You cannot and must not fight anti-fascism by waving a wee banner. You do it properly. You do it by building a country strong enough to create laws, and a people strong enough to withstand everything that comes with doing things properly, the rough and the smooth. So no, you got it wrong all under one banner. Sorry guys, you should be focusing on what matters, freeing our people and our country.
Absolutely. But what doesn't help is something Eva alluded to, Lloyd, same question, but Techie, can you stick up the picture? One of our former First Ministers, Mr. Humza Yousaf, has thrown fuel in the fire by, again, suggesting that Scotland is full of racism and hatred, so much so that he's thinking about transplanting himself and his family way outside. I think he was alluding to going to Pakistan with his family to get outside, away from this hate and Islamophobia. Now, I'm sure we've got our Islamophobes in Scotland, and there are people who, will join in this march next week. But it doesn't help when a former First Minister is saying he thinks that we're full of hate.
No, it doesn't help. But then again, we shouldn't be talking about Hamza Yusuf as a former First Minister. In actual fact, we shouldn't be talking about Hamza Yusuf as a former anything. Hamza Yusuf's contribution to Scottish politics has been poor at best, atrocious, possibly. I don't know why people want to listen to what he has to say, but let's get to the essential element here. What has happened with All Under One Banner is they've been taken in by British politics. Just as the movement has been actually heading towards, and PRISM to some degree makes a great contribution towards this, of seeing ourselves being separate entirely from Britain and recognising that our campaign is against the British, not with them. I find it extraordinary that some of the people who are saying that this is Scotland making a stand. Though Scotland making a stand would have been to have the Independence March in Edinburgh as planned, drawing everyone together to state very clearly we wish to address these issues of fascism and racism by becoming an independent country using our own laws. This is what this is the essential part of the independence movement, is to recognise the difference, to be proud of the difference. For us to allow ourselves to be dragged into what is effectively a foul element of British politics when we want to create Scottish politics is to me is a complete failure of analysis, a complete failure of understanding. But then again, immediately you become locked into some of the people who are connected to, particularly this fake organisation Antifa. The same people who would deny 50% of the population of the country, or 51%, all women, their rights for the sake of protecting what they believe is a persecuted minority. I think if you take your analysis from people of that approach, then what you're going to end up in is being effectively used and abused by the British state. There's nothing clearer than in the statement by Mr. Yaxley Lennon that he's going to come to Glasgow, that they want confrontation. And we know from the past, particularly from the 19th of September 2014, that there are those who would claim allegiance to Britain who will take to the streets to cause mayhem and havoc. Mm-hmm. And I cannot for the life of me understand how you could sit in a room and decide that putting the movement, the people of the movement, in a potential danger by confronting people who wish to be confronted is in some way advancing the cause of independence, when in actual fact we should be ignoring this. We should be pretending it's not happening. Let the police deal with it. Let Mr. Yaxley Lennon and his idiots have their gathering in Glasgow. But we, the movement for independence, the people of Scotland, should be in Edinburgh, stating very clearly, this is not us, we are not them, and we will not confront them because that's what they want. To me, it's student politics at its worst. It's like being back in the early 1980s when we had all these ridiculous arguments about the no platforming of Nazis, the no platforming of certain. Now, what has no platforming got us? Absolutely nothing. Ignoring these people is the way to deal with them. It's the way they were crushed effectively in the 80s and early 90s, and they will be again. But for us to have the campaign for independence, which has been happening for over 300 years in one way or another, to be dragged into what is a spat between the British government and those those particularly in England and Wales, who would challenge that government. It's nothing to do with us. Our challenge is we do not want you as our government. Not that we want you to reform or change. We want our own government. We want our flag outside the United Nations building. That's about it, Roddy.
Yeah, I made my point quite clear. As I say, I think it's wrong. I think it's a mistake. We should, just as you said, we should have had a huge march. Every anti-fascist should have come to Edinburgh and left them, because sure as hell, even left to their own devices, they will fight among themselves. They will loot, they will rob, they will burn. They don't need us. Instead of looking for people with brown faces, they'll be looking for people with salt tires. That's how they'll do it. So I think it's a terrible mistake. But here's the other thing, Eva. Well, in this show, we have been saying for years now, and we continue to say since the general election, we need unity. We need to stop all the petty arguing. John Swinney, that man who leads the Scottish Government and the SNP, called a summit. Techie, stick up the paper, would you? The picture. He called a summit, and he called in all the British parties. He had wee Sarwar there, wee Alexander Cole Hamilton. He had the wee green guy, whom said was his worst mistake, sacking him. Well, bizarre. And he had everyone there, but the only other independence party in the room, e.g. Alba Ash Regan. He even had the woman who chooses to live in England and be the Chief Constable of Scotland, sitting in the room. He didn't have the other independents. So those of us looking for unity or thinking the SNP can lead to unity, we've just been sent a message.
Well, there's a lot of different strands to these events, as we've seen this week. And one very interesting aspect is to consider what we're being distracted or diverted away from and what is not being discussed and what is not being addressed. And there are at least two major issues this week that the Scottish Government, John Swinney in particular, have signally failed to address properly. One is the results of the Scottish exams and the very serious difficulties that there are in respect of the educational attainment of our children, or as we call them now, learners. And the difficulty for the SNP is that she, who wanted to be judged on her record on education and reducing the attainment gap, has been silent in respect to the fact that the attainment gap has widened, it has increased. And yet this week we hear very, very little from the SNP about that. We also hear, as far as I can tell, absolutely nothing from the Scottish Government in respect of the shame and the disgrace at the Olympics of having men in a ring with women, and on Friday night, I think Saturday night rather in particular, the spectacle of a young woman battered and bleeding at the end of a 5-round bout with someone who is a biological male. These are issues that were divisive in Scotland: the education position, the lack of competent government, issues in respect of gender or sex equality. And instead of dealing with these matters, which are immediate and of concern to very many people, what we have instead is a diversion onto, let's talk about how racism and fascism are problems elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And instead of having a Scottish-centric approach, we invite, as you say, the British parties into the heart of government in Scotland to talk about this without pulling in those who represent a fair percentage of the population of Scotland who support independence but wouldn't necessarily support what is at the moment any mainstream party. It's indicative of the party who painted on the windows of the ferry. You begin to think that their eyes and ears are painted on and they are completely oblivious to and out of touch with the mood of the nation and the feeling of the nation. Because the feeling in Scotland just now is major depression, fear, and utter abject frustration at the poor performance of the Scottish Government and their apparently willful blindness to the flaws and the problems and the difficulties faced every single day. The last thing, and I promise you, the last thing the people of Scotland need is an almost all-party summit on British problems. What they need is the shoulder to the wheel of the people of Scotland who know how to make this a better place. Earlier this week, I was interested to see that Kate Forbes had a meeting with Mary Macklin to talk about poverty, inequality, and how to kickstart the economy in effect. And I think quite a lot of that would be to do with housing and related issues. Now, that was a positive development, but it beggars the question as to why and why now Miss Forbes met Mary Macklin and Mary Macklin only. When is she going to meet Alec Neil to talk to him about the housing crisis? When is somebody going to meet and have proper discussions with Anne-Marie Ward and others about the drugs crisis? When are they going to speak to people in the NHS in the know about the crisis there? When is the long overdue patients representative, who was supposed to be appointed a year and a half ago, actually going to be appointed? Why have they not been appointed yet? Why has John Swinney taken his eye off all of these balls, and the only ball he's interested in is the British one? You know, this is not the way to run Scotland unless you want to keep Scotland devolved permanently in hock to the Union, cozying up to the Unionist parties and begging for scraps off the Westminster table.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say that the only balls that the SNP are in this town are those on women, because they think women have got balls. But I didn't want to say that because it might offend some people. Dear, I've offended them. But the problem here, another one, Phil, is that there's a knee-jerk reaction to all this racist riots, etc. And there's two things that have happened, one in Belfast and one in England, that concern me. That this let's follow the British lead. Because there's one of a boy, now I totally disagree with everything this guy, Billy Thompson down south, a 31-year-old, does. I want to read out a wee thing. He was sent to prison for 12 weeks after he put a Facebook page up, a post up saying, calling the police filthy bastards for putting out a dispersal order to try and prevent protests from becoming violent. Now, he wrote that. It's not something I would agree with. I defend his right to say it, but to get 12 weeks in prison for it. And another one, a young boy in Belfast, Cameron Armstrong, he was charged with rioting, but although his lawyers stated they had only gone to the area where the protests were taking place to have a look. Now, whether that's right or wrong, we don't know. There's been some information that he maybe did more than look. But the important thing was pointed out is what the judge said. And he said, and this could be ongoing, and could happen to us here in Scotland, anybody involving themselves in this type of behaviour, this type of disorder, as an active participant or a curious observer, can expect to be, save for the most exceptional circumstances, remanded in custody. And this defendant is remanded into custody. So if a riot happens and you happen to be walking along the street, minding your own business with your bag of little messages, you could easily get remanded in custody. What the hell's going on here, Phil?
That's fascism. And that judge, we need to name the judge, shame the judge, bring the judge to justice. Who judges the judge? This is the problem. This goes back to the law and how important it is and how abusive the law must be stood up against fiercely. We must fight any abuse of the law, whether it comes from the system itself. And if the laws are bad, there are bad laws, we change them. We do it through due process, but we must not allow the abuse of the law. It's the same as what happened with Craig Murray, imprisoned and all the stuff and the abuse of the law in relation to Julian Assange. This is a metric of our supposed civilization. And this is what we've got to stand up for. These are the things that we need to do. And we can only really do this when we take control of our own destiny and revisit the directives and the construct of our own institutions, which have been corrupted by the influences, the lobbyists, the policemen of the corporations and the powers that actually run what's going on in the Western world at the minute. The people need to rise up and realise the strength that we have in our unity. And that sounds like a very generic, low definition, low resolution fix. Well, here's how you do it. Here's how you do it. You take control of your own country by continuing with the all under one banner march, by standing up and taking possession of your own government and getting rid of those that have sold us out. This goes back to the last three questions. Hamza is a weak man and a puppet. If he thinks he's going to Pakistan to escape hate and corruption in politics, he's wrong and he knows it. Just follow the great Imran Khan story. He would say this. He would say this because he is finished. He rose on the coattails of Nicola with very little talent, big eyelashes by all accounts, and her ilk, and he's finished. They're all finished. He's a sheep to be ignored, as Lloyd says, and he's never a leader, never to be followed. As for sacking the Greens, that cost him something, you said earlier, nah. You're a weak, ineffectual sheep. Humza. Not a man, not a leader, jog on. And John, playing the union game? Exactly the same story. Jog on, John. I mean, you're finished too. We should remove him permanently. You're part of a leadership, an SNP leadership, who, credit where it was due, you helped build the SNP, and it's this dichotomy, this difficulty to change the game. Sometimes you've got to be in it, and there's certain things you've got to do, right, to be in the game. But at what point do you stop fighting for what matters and sell out do you become a sellout? It's a real difficult balance. But a long time ago, Nicola sold out, and everybody that follows and followed on since then has betrayed us. And for that, there's no coming back. So, John, you're finished too. And you see this. This is how we are controlled. We've talked about it many times. We've talked about it last week as well. Westminster's designed to turn your head. This grandiose, you get somebody for the scheme who's lucky enough to get in there and they get their head turned, or they're getting, like most of these MPs and MSPs or European representatives, they're getting a deal. They're getting more money than they'll ever have in any other job they're going to have going forward, and they're actually listened to. I mean, look at some of the stuff that some of the ex-MPs are posting. It's embarrassing. They miss the limelight. They miss being listened to, and it's their ego that's getting the better of them. Some of the stupid stuff. I mean, I saw Alison Thulis put up. I accidentally left the door and 2 pigeons flew in, even though there was a sign there. Oh, piss off! I mean, really. And these are the big hitters that we want back in. No, we need leaders, not sheep. This lot are all sheep. To hell with them.
But we sort of talked about it last week when I said, if the government can't respect the law and they just took whatever laws they like, and then this seems to me like 2 knee-jerk reactions, Lloyd, to play to the gallery, to play to the politicians, to make examples of some working class guys. I watched that. I don't know if you saw it. Rowan Atkinson recently this week did a great thing on freedom of speech, and as he said, I'm fine. I'm a high profile. He was just saying I'm wealthy. I'm above it. And it's people like Cameron Armstrong, the 18-year-old from Belfast, and 31-year-old Billy Thompson, who are going to, be subject and treated like pieces of dirt by the law system. We have law. It's got to be law for the same for all of us, surely, or it's a breakdown of society.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's like there's a collective madness, because there were those events last week in England, primarily, drummed up by the EDL. The government goes mad. We must do something. I'm surprised they didn't bring in emergency legislation, but they certainly sent out a very, very clear message to the police and the prosecutors that they were to take a hard line. Now, to me, this is amateur politics, because what happened on Wednesday, by Friday, had been completely reversed by the anti-fascist, anti-racist organisations in England, who flooded the streets and prevented any further disturbances. Now, I find Britain is an extraordinary place where if a newspaper headline says something terrible's happening, then the next thing you hear is the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister saying something terrible's happening. We need to crack down on this. We need to bring in law, as opposed to giving it 24, 48 hours just to see if maybe things calm down like they normally do. Now, Britain's great for collective madness. I mean, it's a thing that this country seems to thrive on. You find a bogeyman and you point at them, and then. But what's happened with the pointing at the bogeyman in this circumstance is that the comfortable political class in England have suddenly discovered that they are so out of touch with their own electorate that they weren't aware that something like what the demonstrations and the riots over the past week, that they were entirely unaware that these things were likely. Isn't that the real kind of indictment? It's the indictment of the politicians who did not see this coming when only, 6-7 weeks ago, they had an election. They were knocking on doors. They were telling us in every news programme about what the people were saying to them on the doors, that they were firmly on the pulse. Well, how the hell did they miss the pulse of this? You know, let's be honest about this. We have politicians who are operating both at a British level and a Scottish level and a Welsh level and a Northern Irish level, entirely reactive to what it says on the front page of the Daily Mail, the Express, the Daily Record, or the Mirror. And this has become the absolute focus. We make law, we create policy based on reaction to a newspaper. And this has been happening, well, not my entire life, but certainly the last 30 years. The power of the headline. And that brings me round to John's little summit. John Swinney, leader of the Scottish National Party's little summit. Why did John have that meeting? Because there was a headline in the papers and John had to be seen to be doing something. He could have done it in the coffee room. They didn't need to put out a press release. They didn't have to order it in one of the cabinet rooms. He could have phoned Patrick Harvey. He could have phoned Alec Cole-Hamilton. He could have phoned Anna Sarwar. There was no necessity for any of this other than, and it's oh God, how many times do we use this phrase in this programme? It was the signal of virtue, yet again, to be seen to be doing something. What? Sharing some Highland Spring, some coffee and some shortbread in a room with people that you just saw walking along the corridor 5 minutes before is absurd. It's absolutely absurd, but it shows the nature, the quality and the depth of intellect in the leadership of the Scottish Government at the moment, where they think they're getting a photograph or a 30-second element on the STV and BBC News because they are doing something. They got some people in a room and they talked about something that's happening in a different country and has got absolutely nothing to do with us. It's not your job, John. Your job as leader of the Scottish National Party and First Minister of this country is to get Scotland independent as soon as possible and on the way address the issues, the real issues of poverty, housing, the collapse of our legal system, another thing which, you know, not too many people are paying much attention to. And most importantly of all, John, kindly explain to the people of this country how 27 special economic zones and 2 free ports are going to lead Scotland to the land of milk and honey.
Exactly. Of course, they're doing it. It was a very British thing to do, and John did it like a good little British devolutionist. Another one cracker this week I loved, Eva, and it was Tommy Shepherd put out an article. Techie, could you stick it up? Talking about there's been no stifling debate on why the SNP lost the election. And then the best of this one, he then blocked all comments, Eva. So there was no stifling debate. If there was a medal for in Paris for irony, Tommy would have won it. Scotland would have got a gold. It's a classic. And probably still doesn't see it to this day.
The issue about this is not this. It's just not the least bit surprising that that's what he did. That's what you would expect him to do, because what he's doing, along with so many of his colleagues, is building the case for his candidacy for Holyrood 2026. And if he hears the right noises from the SNP, then he'll continue to do what he's doing. If he doesn't, he'll jump ship to the Labour Party. I don't think there's anything surer than that. And what's interesting is to see the complete lack of strategic thinking or the lack of strategic planning being done by the SNP, and probably not being done by the other independent supporting parties either, who need to get used to the fact that 2026 will not be 2021. There isn't going to be the same scope for a super majority where you vote for one party on the constituency and another on the list, because the SNP will be so low in the polls that they will need to pick up list seats.
Yeah.
And it'll be really interesting to see what happens with their previous mechanism whereby the lists were zipped and you got to the top of half of them if, like me, you had a self-declared disability, and you got to the top of the other half if you were from the BAME community. So I'm wondering which it is that Tommy Sheppard intends to claim to get to the top of a list if he doesn't get a constituency place. And that's a dilemma that many will have. Either that, or miraculously you'll see that the zipping of the lists will change and those old rules will somehow be rewritten and countermanded. But again, I go back to what you've said, Lloyd said, Phil said. Who is addressing the real issues that face Scotland these days? Because these headlines from the likes of Tommy Sheppard, who was elected in 2015 and spent the next 9 years not arguing for independence, not fighting for independence, not delivering on the mandates that were given, they're hitting the headlines for spurious reasons that do nothing to advance Scotland's cause, that do nothing to advance Scotland's interests. And all the while, we're spending in the background absolute fortunes on stupid policies, such as all those green policies that are going to end in tears for many people, and big, big bills for the Scottish Government in respect of compensation to be paid to those who lost out, especially in the deposit return scheme. In the background, trundling on, you have issues in relation, for example, to the Scottish Child Abuse Investigation and Inquiry and compensation to be paid to people there. There's controversy about the scope of that investigation and about a number of victims who are still left voiceless after many years. There are other issues, as was said already, about education and how the education system is failing. We have controversies in several local authorities who are cutting teacher numbers at a point in time when we need to be increasing teacher numbers. With a national housing emergency, local housing emergencies, a multitude of difficulties that we're faced, and yet the headline is whether or not the SNP have stifled debate on how come they got gubbed in the election. Well, the last, half an hour of this programme is all they need. They know why they got gubbed. It was because they took their eye off the ball, they did not deliver competent government, and they did not spell out the positive case for independence the way the rest of us have been doing for decades. So debate has been stifled. Were it not, that constitutional convention that was promised by Stephen Flynn and by John Swinney and by others long before the 4th of July election, that constitutional convention would have been up and running by now. Instead of that, it doesn't even merit a whisper of a mention. No. We would have had that. We would have had concerted efforts to bring the movement together. Instead of fracturing the movement by having competing matches and rallies all happening at the same time but in different places, you would have had Gordon McIntyre Kemp phoning the people all under one banner and burying the hatchet, not between each other's shoulder blades, but burying the hatchet once and for all and getting the troops out, getting the people on the streets in their hundreds of thousands to have 150,000, 200,000 marching in Glasgow or in Edinburgh or 100,000 in Aberdeen or Inverness. That's what will happen when the leaders of these movements grow up and start talking to each other constructively and forget about personal ambitions. Country before party and country before personal ambitions every day of the week. That's what will get us independence.
Yeah. In fact, talking of Gordon Mackay Kemp being an absolute grifter, and I'm calling you that, mate, he's now declared a march in Edinburgh on the 14th, which will go against Hope Over Here, of course, which has it every year, looking for the angle every time, disgusting. But as to Tommy, I think they're a bit unfair. He was, 9 years he said doing nothing. He was being a good parliamentarian, as he told us in 2015, for 9 years. Did bugger all for independence, but a good parliamentarian. And he should be like Mary Black. Last week, she declared she had attention disorder syndrome, so she can get to the top of the list. He should maybe, I said, go for Tourette's, Tommy. That's an easy one. I've got it. I can get to the top of an SNP list. As you know, I've got Barhead Tourette's. Anyone that's been in conversation with me for any length of time will know that. The clock's kicking on, and there's so much I want to get through this week. But another one, Tommy Sheppard, I'll have your comments on that one, Phil, how there was no debate. But the other one that is worth a debate is Murdo Fraser, who's thrown his hat into the ring to become the leader of the Scottish Tory party. And he was extolling the virtues, how wonderful Alex Salmond's government was, best government we've ever had in Scotland. I don't remember him saying that any time when Alec was actually the First Minister, do you?
No, because it didn't suit the narrative at the time.
No.
Right now, not exactly sure why he's saying something like that, but I think he's more compare and contrast, because even a blind man and a galloping horse can see that the contrast between the SNP under Alex Salmond and the SNP since Nicola took over, and the other assorted shysters, many of whom were there all the way through. But it just shows that balance. How much do you follow and look after your gravy train seat, or when do you actually stand up and say no, enough is enough? Because we've seen that with some of them. This is going back to Tommy and the rest of them. It's first of all Eva for first minister on that one, on what she's last saying, what she says every week. 53% or something like that of the people want independence. And these politicians will have to listen at some point. We are making the SNP pay for their betrayal. And you watch out, all of you politicians, you better watch out, because we the people will rise. And this is why All Under One Banner is so important. It's why we need not wait for the politicians. We need to act. And this is why then one of the initiatives we've taken with the new some of the new initiatives that we've been involved in are so important. The politicians need to be shown the direction, and Tommy's talking nonsense. Eva's right, Lloyd's right. It's self-interest from Tommy. Listen, when I met Tommy in 2015, I disagreed with his opening speech, but I found him a smart guy, a likeable guy. He was part of the old Labour, but he sold out. So goodbye, Tommy. And a wee bit insight, those that know him, Tommy has a wee bit of a hearing problem, so I expect this one to surface.
They all do in the SNP.
Yeah, but actually physical hearing problem, so I expect this one just to surface just in time to support his candidacy for the next the run-in, I would expect. Tommy sided with the shysters, and now you lay in that bed, Tommy. So several rows after they lost their seat, and remember when they only rose and said, "Oh no, we were complaining from within about the problem the SNP walked away from independence." Oh, a little too late, folks. You've spent the last 9 years creaming it in, and now the only way you see, now that the penny's dropped, the only way I can get back in there and get the same money I was getting is to get a political position. That comes first. And when that comes first, nah, not good enough. None of these people should be put back into positions, I'm afraid. If you didn't have the gumption to stand up for the people of Scotland, that was 9 years of unnecessary suffering by the people of Scotland. And you contributed. You're part of the problem, not the solution. Jog on, the lotties. As for Murdo, yeah, Murdo. What's he won? Has he won any? Has he ever won anything, Murdo? Has he? I mean, the guy, really? Murdo Fraser? Nah. I mean, I get one. I remember in a debate with him on energy, and it was, and I kind of, it was when I started to lose it a wee bit with the whole political setup. It was it's one of my specialist subjects. It was at Strathclyde University. I think our energy minister in Scotland couldn't attend, and I was chucked in at the last minute a presentation in Strathclyde University on all of these companies that were coming in with research and development ideas. I would have funded every single one of them had I been energy minister. Every single one of them, because that's the secret. That's where you stay ahead of the game, And Murdo Fraser was there, and he just came out with his sad, same old lines, as did Labour. The Lib Dem guy actually had somebody for the industry who was obviously, it was his first speech or whatever, he was a bit nervous. But I was written right into them, and Murdo had no answer. And I was warned, oh, Murdo's a sharp operator. A sharp operator? Jesus. I don't know. Don't run with scissors. That's the only advice Murdo ever came out with, I think, that was worth listening to. Guy, nah, sling your hook, Murdo. You're a waste of space. Part of the problem, not the solution. Ciao.
Correct. Did you find it amusing, Lloyd, that suddenly we have got Murdo Fraser saying how great Alex Salmond was, and yet the whole time Alex Salmond was there, he was attacking him every bloody opportunity.
Typical Murdo stuff, really. I mean, he's throwing his hat into the ring, and he knows that the hat's going to get thrown straight back out again. But what he's doing is he's playing to that small coterie. I mean, in some ways, this is Murdo making sure that he holds on to the top of the list place in the 2026 election. He has to take part in this, or because he's as Phil says, he's the smart one. But bizarre listening to Phil there, and having attended my branch meeting this week, where the bold Mr. Shepherd came and gave us his analysis of what is going wrong and what we need to do in the future. That's an entire double episode program on its own, let me assure you. But I suddenly realised Tommy Shepherd and Murdo Fraser are the same person. They just inhabit different bodies. But they believe the same things. They say the same things. And when they get caught out in a corner and they freeze, then they think to themselves, what is it that everybody wants to hear? And then they say it. And it's, this is British politics. I mean, in some ways, okay, they're going to fight for seats at the 2026 election. Murdo's doing his bit. Shepherd's doing his bit to achieve something. But what's really worrying, or should be worrying for them, is particularly those that want to stand for the SNP in 2026. And this is a quote from Mr. Shepherd from the other night. With our level of membership, our number of activists is abysmal. I told him that in 2016. That's the reality. The reality of the Scottish National Party at the moment. Time's up. Thanks for that, Phil. You're absolutely right. But, hey, Murdo will do what Murdo does. When he's not winding up Celtic fans, he's winding up the SNP or winding up the Liberal Democrats, or just generally speaking, doing what an overgrown Scottish public schoolboy does for a living.
Nothing wrong with winding up Celtic fans, if you ask me, but you didn't ask me. But here's, I want to help the SNP. Eva says they're going to need the list seats. They wouldn't need the list seats if you did the following. I don't know how many times I've got to tell you. Mea culpa, John. Admit you made a mistake. Admit that the gender politics was a mistake. Admit that Sturgeon was divisive. Admit that going after Alex Salmond was wrong. Admit that taking your eye off the ball was wrong. Say that now it's independence, nothing less. Call a constitutional convention and say that you're going to have one policy and one policy only from here on in, and that is independence. And you will win the constituency seats. The majority of people in Scotland still want independence. But if you keep your head in the sand and you keep denial and you keep refusing to debate and accepting the real reasons you lost, you're heading for disaster. But they're the only ones that are heading for disaster, because this week, techie, stick up, the old BBC, God bless them. The Ofcoms approved that the BBC Scotland plan to cut their news output by half, by 50%. They're only getting 10,000 viewers a week, nearly as many as us. But, maybe there's a reason for that, Eva. Maybe if they gave us news, if they told the truth and told it from the heart like we do. For example, they talk about ferries, but what they don't do, get the next one ready, Techie, is tell you, for example, that the entire UK submarine fleet is tied up in port because they haven't got anywhere to fix them. They haven't got a crane that works at Faz Lane. They're all stuck. So if, Rishi Sunak said we're ready to fight the Russians, as long as you can fight them without aircraft carriers, without submarines, without sodgers, we're ready. Maybe BBC News telling the truth, actually catering for the 52% of the population that don't want men in women's sports, people that want independence. Maybe they would be doubling their output, not halving it.
Quite interesting to analyse what the BBC do and don't report about, because clearly if it's not on the BBC, then it didn't happen. So they don't report the stuff that folk are actually talking about or are concerned about. And they do report and frequently have special features on the stuff that in the main people are genuinely disinterested in or particularly angry about. And that's an awful lot of what they call queer items. So they've substantial output in respect of, for example, drag queens and what they call the queer agenda. They have reported in the course of the past few days often about the Olympic boxing and referred to the two male competitors using female pronouns. They've done their best to dodge the controversy that surrounds those. And what they've mainly done in regard to Scotland is continue with the British politicisation of the Scottish political agenda and reported about all that we've spoken about today as regards John Swinney's attempts to cover the anti-fascism and anti-racism protests here and to have, organised meetings of unionist politicians. What the BBC are famous for not reporting about is the truth on the ground in respect to the opposition to, for example, gender ideology, the massive support that there remains on the doorsteps and in the streets for independence. Now, during the election campaign, that was very painfully obvious, because very rarely did you ever see on the BBC an interview of Joe Public talking about how he or she wanted independence and didn't know who they should vote for to prioritise that aim. So the BBC have made a big mistake yet again by reducing their output. If they wanted to increase their viewer numbers and their viewer participation, they would increase the output in news. They would have roving reporters covering every inch of Scotland. They would interview people in Orkney and Shetland about their views. They'd be down in the borders. They'd be over in Skye. They would be talking about housing issues in Skye. They'd be talking about the failure of NHS provision in Skye. They would be talking about educational difficulties on the islands and in the cities. They would be reporting on the issues that really matter to the people. But they're not doing that because it suits the BBC establishment purpose to pretend that it's business as usual and that Scotland's getting a good deal out of the Union, out of Westminster, and that devolution is as good as it gets.
Well, that was one of my arguments about the AOUB, because no matter who starts the trouble, the Scottish independence movement will get the blame for it. It's always the same. We saw that on the 19th of September when the British nationalists ran amok in George Square and throughout the city of Glasgow. It was hardly reported. They ignored it. They didn't want to bring it up because you can't say anything nasty about the Union or the Britannia. The clock is beaten, so let's speed things. There's a few things that need mentioned. Now, there's an upcoming remembrance in Nagasaki for that horrific bomb. I've been to Hiroshima. I never got to Nagasaki. I've been to Hiroshima. It's horrific, folks. But I can't explain it. It's one of those things you have to go, same as Auschwitz, if you ever get to that. There's a feeling. It's horrific. But the mayor of Nagasaki decided that he didn't want the Israeli ambassador there because they're under, they've been accused of genocide. It's been proved. The ICC are talking about putting out warrants for arrests. There's a slaughter going on, and I didn't think it was right to have people there at that. Immediately, the US, the UK, France, Australia, Lithuania said they weren't going to attend if Israel wasn't going to attend. It really disgusting, Phil.
Yeah, and I too, when I was working in Korea, Burma, Japan, had the occasion to visit Hiroshima, and I wept a wee. I mean, I was trying to cover it up a wee bit, but it was very emotive.
Yeah.
You've seen it yourself, obviously. You saw the big map and the pictures. Oh,
and the bit in the pavement where the guy was sitting and was
the shadow and all that. Oh, scary! Absolutely horrific. So courageous of the Japanese government to stand up, like so many around the world. But are our media reporting it now? That list of countries led by people who are betraying their own people, because we should stand up for justice and we should have the debate. We should not be frightened to speak the truth as we see it, and our truth might be different from someone else's truth as they perceive it, but let's have the discussion. Let's have the courage to have these difficult conversations. And this comes right back to what you're talking about with Faslane. I worked at Rosyth. I worked in the Falklands. I've worked for the military-industrial complex, and it's a mess at the minute. It's an absolute mess. Do we need a military? Yes, we do. We should be part of a European concentric defence force, a defence force for peace, a defence force, not an attack force. Big difference. And I'm strongly behind that. And I think a Europe that is being mutilated by the existing institutions of Europe, like the EU, at the moment. We need to control these leaders. We need to get these directions, because these are the people that are making these decisions in our name, like not attending the Hiroshima event. They're making that decision for us, our country, and that's not what we would decide. The majority of people in Scotland don't want that. We would attend, and we would also stand up wherever we see injustice, and we would enforce peace if we had to, if it was the right thing to do. And we will have the hard conversations. So a Europe that's currently struggling like this, we need to get rid of the van der Leyen's and the current leaders of all of these countries that were just listed for failing to face up to the reality and the truth. So for me, it's critical that more than ever that we become an independent nation and implement the values and principles that we hold dear as a people, because it's the only way. And one of the big arguments for not being part of the UK is that England, for me, is lost at the moment. All the riots were in England. It's lost. My mum was born there. We have an affection with them. We've got much more in common with England than perhaps we like to admit. I certainly do.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, I do. But however, their politics is way wrong. They're suffering at the minute. We are fortunate to be in a position where we can rise above it and show them the way, and be a more nimble force, not just economically, but we can react to this corruption and to these defects in our current society. And we can hopefully, with for me, the Scandinavian countries, that's the kind of economic model and principle, the egalitarianism, the values, the looking after your own principles. That's what we should be following, and that is why it's more important than ever that we stand on our own 2 feet and show the rest of the world the way, as we did during the Scottish Enlightenment.
Yeah. We should stand on our own 2 feet. I should say, look, we cause all sorts of problems, but it would get headlines. I've always said we should push the boundaries of everything we can to upset the British. And if I was John Swinney, if I was the leader of the Scottish government just now, I would be on to the Japanese ambassador and say, I would like to attend Nagasaki on behalf of the people of Scotland. And I would go. And if the Japanese would, do it, and I would go. And it would enrage the British establishment. And I would say to them, but here's the thing, Lloyd, the countries that are refusing to go to the Nagasaki commemoration are the same ones who are trying to tell the people there is no genocide, there is no war crimes. Before you answer that, and this one, Techie, stick up that video. This video is horrific. I warn you, viewer discretion.
כפותים, עיניהם מכוסות. הנה כאן קבוצה של חיילי המילואים מכוח 100, יחידה המשמשת להבטחת המתקן. הם לוקחים את המחבל, הנה הם כאן בפינת המתקן, כנראה מודעים למצלמות האבטחה, ומנסים להסתיר מעשיהם במגינים. הצילום כולל תיעוד של העבירה מיוחסת לאנשי המילואים, מעשה סדום בנסיבות אינוס. שעות אחר כך פונה המחבל לבית החולים מדמם. הפציעות שלו הוגדרו מורכבות. הקביעה הרפואית חד משמעית. הפציעות נגרמו מהחדרה של חפץ.
The man involved in that, Lloyd, was taken to hospital where he had a ripped rectum, a perforated bowel, and massive injuries. That is what the British government, the US government, the Lithuanian government, the Australian government, the French government are condoning by not going to Nagasaki. They're saying that's all right to do that. That's but not in my name.
We're living in a world of collective madness. I saw one of the soldiers involved in that the following night was on the main chat show on Israeli television, where he explained what had gone on. It was acceptable for a person, a soldier, and I believe he's an officer, to admit on television, on Israeli national television, that yes, he committed rape, but he should have the right to do that. Roddy, this is hard stuff. But when you give a country or an organization or a grouping, be it Israel, be it the Gestapo, be it, the the Interahamwe in Rwanda during the massacre. If you give people an absolute carte blanche, if your leaders are saying that you can do anything because of the extraordinary circumstances that you are in, and remembering that in the mentality of the Israeli, they've been in extraordinary circumstances since 1948, you know? They believe very firmly that they can take any action they wish to preserve themselves, and their politicians allow them to do that. And by default, every single member of Labour Friends of Israel, Conservative Friends of Israel, or any of those in the Scottish Parliament who support the Israelis in any kind of a way, you are complicit in what you just watched. That's a reality. If you give absolute immunity effectively to the country that is Israel, and it ties in with what happened at Nagasaki, if you give them that, then they will use it, and they will use it to its ultimate end. Yesterday afternoon on Israeli television, a very senior rabbi was calling for the use of atomic weapons on Tehran, on Jeddah, on Beirut, on Amman, and not to worry if there was a nuclear reply on Israel, because that will bring forward the day of the arrival of the Savior. You know, we hear constantly about the madness of Islam. I'm terribly sorry. There is no element in Islam that says we will bring the world to an end and the end of the human race for the sake of us achieving our attainment of heaven. You have that in fundamental Christianity, and you have that as a very firm central principle of the Torah and the Talmud. Which religion is it? Which one of these religions is the religion of mass murder and hate? Is it Islam? Not in my eyes. That's not what I've seen throughout my entire life. Far more people have died in my television who are of the Muslim faith than of any other in the past 40 years. That's a reality, a truth, an uncomfortable truth for some. But let me get back to the issue of Nagasaki. The Japanese understand very firmly. I met with a number of people from Nagasaki and Hiroshima as part of the Guernica initiative, which takes place in the Basque Country, the first town that was carpet bombed from the air. Now, in Japan, the Nagasaki and Hiroshima commemorations are the preserve entirely of the local government. So when you introduced this, Roddy, you said the mayor had invited all these people, not the Japanese government, the mayor, because the Japanese understand that this is for the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's not about international politics, and that Japan should stand back from that. That's why it's made local, because by making it local, you make it you make it something that people understand was about ordinary people and not about governments. It was about that shadow on the pavement. It's real people. The idea that Israel can pick up the phone, and Australia, Britain, the United States, Lithuania, and any other number of countries will say, no, we will boycott this because you're being unpleasant to our Israeli pals. Well, I'll tell you, if you hang about with the Israelis, as Eva said right at the beginning of the programme, you lie down with dogs, you'll get up with fleas.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Last item, because the clock is ticking on. Techie, can you stick up the picture of Shamima Begum? And I ask you this, Eva, because it's a legal question. She lost her final UK court for her citizenship. This is the young girl at the age of 15 that was groomed, and it seems by Canadian Secret Service people, sent over to Syria to be a bride of one of the ISIS people. And she's now stateless, which is one thing. But on the same topic, the British people who hold dual nationality in Israel, who are over in the IDF just now, committing a genocide which the ICC, the ICJ, and the United Nations have declared war crimes, they're going to come back to the UK. They're not even going to be questioned at the border, are they? Again, the law has been bent to suit the politicians, not the law.
Absolutely. It's entirely double standards, as we've come to expect from the British establishment, unfortunately. You know, what happened to the rule of law? What happened to humanity? We had, you know, like me, the rest of you studied history at school. You did in your O-grade history learn about why the League of Nations developed. You learned about why we have Geneva Conventions, why we have UN conventions, why we have the United Nations at all. We speak about humanity. We speak about human values, humanitarian values. Each of us wanted to make the world a better place and to leave the world in a better position than it was when we arrived in it. But what we see unfolding in the Middle East is absolutely horror beyond belief, but it's likely repetition of events that have gone on since time immemorial. And yet in this 21st century civilization, we're just compounding all the ills and the horrors of the past. Now, Shamima Begum was, as you said correctly, aged 15 when she was radicalised and groomed. In the UK, and especially in Scotland, it's understood that your brain doesn't mature until you're aged about 25. That's why there's a prohibition against lengthy prison sentences for criminals in Scotland who are convicted and who are aged less than 25 at that time. There has to be some degree of acceptance in a civilised society that if a teenager has been radicalised and groomed, a teenager, somebody who has not yet matured, who is still a pupil at school, in secondary school, not old enough to leave school, not old enough to get married, not old enough to vote, and yet some, 9 years later or so, she's banished to, roam the world stateless, with nowhere to put down roots or to claim her homeland, because her homeland, the country that she grew up in, enabled her to be groomed and to be sent abroad, and has ditched her because, her skin's the wrong colour, her race is the wrong one, absolutely, she's on the wrong side. It's very difficult to avoid those conclusions, and none of that is to condone for one tiny second any of the behaviour that she's responsible for, or that she either committed or she condoned. But we have to be civilised and say that the law is there to apply to everybody. We are all equal before the law, and it's cases like this that demonstrate very clearly that, in fact, we are not.
Okay. We've gone full circle, because I'll bet you when there's that anti-racism demonstration in George Square, there'll be very few pictures of Shamima being held up. And as I put in a tweet, if she'd been called Penelope Fortescue Smythe and had blonde hair and blue eyes, the SES would have been sent in to get her. That's a fact. And it's a disgrace and a shame to us all. And if we were in independent Scotland, I'd be getting in touch with the First Minister and saying, give her a passport right now, give her citizenship, and invite her parents up to Scotland and the rest of her family so she can see them again. I think it's a disgrace and a shame in our nation. Anyway, on that we have to end, folks. On this programme, which we dedicate to our friend who has sadly passed, and who will unfortunately not be able to join us again in this show. But I'm sure he's up there watching now, and he's going to be very critical because I said some nasty things about America in this show. I expect him to visit me as a ghost at some time and get me into trouble. But until we see you all again, folks, may you and yours please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.